The African National Congress is all set for the new political year. 2016 had its share of challenges for the ruling party, and this year does not promise to be any less challenging. The year is set to be a defining year for the party, and we're joined in studio by the party's national spokesperson, Mr. Zizi Kodwa, for more on this. Mr. Kodwa, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much. Happy New Year to you.
7 compliments of the season.
Compliments to you.
We hope 2017 will be a better year. But for the ANC, I'm sure this is how you feel. It will be a defining year for the party. What are you hoping to achieve? What is top of the priority for the party as we enter the year?
Every year is a defining year. It's important to understand, for an example, the celebration of the ANC's birth date, which is the January 8th. It's not just an ordinary birthday where people celebrate, pop champagne and so on, and toast and hallelujah, that's the end of it. It's a year that, among others, must inspire hope to South Africans. It's a year that must make a call to action on all South Africans to unite the people of South Africa around particular objective and a goal. Throughout history, that celebration has always given hope to South Africans about the better tomorrow.
Right.
And I think we can't expect anything less this year. That's why even as we go to Orlando Stadium on Sunday, South Africans look forward to the message of the African National Congress to be delivered by President Zuma. And that message must be a message of hope. It must be a message that takes South Africa forward. It must not just be the message directed to members of the ANC, because the ANC does not exist for the sake of the ANC. It exists for the sake of South Africa. We are here already. Leadership of the ANC has landed in numbers in Gauteng. A number of built-up mobilization have been set up in and around Gauteng to make sure that the event of on Sunday, becomes a success. We are able, as early as 9 o'clock, the president of the ANC is able to deliver the message to the country, because that message, it might be a message for this year that gives hope. Of course, the ANC is a living organism. We're influenced by both internal and external factors.
Right, and speaking of those factors, that brings me to my next question. You've spoken of the ANC bringing a message of hope not only within the party but to the nation as well. Just coming back to the party, factions came out in the open during the past NEC. Has the party taken any steps to prevent this going further, particularly with the new year that we're getting into? You
remember in our last General Council we held here in Gauteng, in Kalaka Estate, one of the tendencies, as we're talking about need to build unity as a bedrock of the African National Congress, we said there is the emergence of new tendencies. One of them is factionalism, gatekeeping, slates for an example. We did say we must unite the organization to fight against those new tendencies, because they undermine the very same efforts we're putting together, investment on unity. Factionalism in the organization takes different forms. There's a role of money in the organization. People, they are very loyal to individuals, members of members, gatekeeping, and therefore undermines the very same basic fabric of what it means to be the member of the African National Congress. We'll continue, because we don't think one meeting will resolve that. But we think that the efforts of the African National Congress, led by President Zuma and led by the National Executive Committee, we should be able to overcome over a period of time, because that on its own.
But what steps are you taking? You've mentioned how it affects the party and ultimately the whole nation, as it is the ruling party. But what steps have you taken to make sure it does not happen again? Are there any practical or, disciplinary measures that you have in place? How do you plan on taking this forward?
For an example, where there are serious allegations. Faction, for example, is very immobile. It doesn't have a head. If it does have a head, it has 7 heads. You can't say which shape does it take. And therefore, even it's not defined clearly in terms of the size and the height. But you look at the conduct and the behavior of certain individuals, you realize that this conduct, that it does not befit a member of the African National Congress. It is that conduct that we're following up. We deal with individuals, including groupings in the African National Congress, where people represent certain interests of groups in the African National Congress. We deal with those issues. And the national officials, led by President Zuma, led by 6 officials, have, over the past period, over a passage of time, have been calling individuals, many of whom have conducted themselves outside of the structures of the organization, to say this does not augur well for unity of the African National Congress. And I'm sure they will continue to do so for the sake of unity of the African National Congress.
Right, let's go back to the January 8th statement that will be coming up, that you've already alluded to. What is on the top of the party's wish list for the government?
What is important is that, like I indicated, is that our government must continue to accelerate the program upon which we elected on our manifesto in 2014. And that program, among others, is to acknowledge that we have attained political freedom. But what we're still lacking in the manifesto, for example, we acknowledge that we have implemented almost 8 clauses of the Freedom Charter, but 2 we haven't done as expected in terms of economic transformation and land reform. And we thought this year, at least we must indicate, not just indicate in terms of the pronouncements, there's got to be clear programs of social economic transformation, but at the same time in terms of land reform and land redistribution, with clear programs and time frames, so that at least we're able, by the end of the term of this current government led by the ANC, we're able to say we have achieved this much in implementing all the 10 clauses of the Freedom Charter.
And the same statements that you've mentioned were spoken by the President during his Happy New Year message to the nation, that economic transformation is top of the list on the agenda for the government come 2017. But why do you think it has taken so long after 22 years of democracy, this transformation that most black people on the ground are hoping to see happen soon?
You will recall that there were a number of policy interventions just in terms of how we de-racialize the economy. We have made, including now what is called the triple BEE. It was part of the intervention to de-racialize the economy. But nothing much has changed in terms of the control, the management of the economy. And something drastically, and I mean drastically, would need to be taken into account in order to manage and change the control, the management of the economy. If our economy continues to be at the hand of 70% of it, to be at the hands of white males, 70% of it, including the land restitution, that we haven't done much since the 1913 Land Act, it means we haven't done much because we could continue to enjoy political freedom, but those who enjoy economic power, they will continue to direct, and also the pace at which transformation must take place in society. Right. We can't allow that as the African National Congress.
And speaking of white monopoly capital, President Jacob Zuma said, and I will quote, he says, "I will not resign because if I do so, I'll be surrendering to the monopoly capital because I ask, what wrong have I done?" What is the ANC's comment on this?
No, we have full confidence in President Zuma. We've indicated on a number of occasions that it's not about President Zuma. Even President Zuma were to resign today and Zizikoto becomes the president, Zizikoto will be the target. It's about the position, it's about the office. People who have already identified the ANC as an enemy, they've always understood that in order to weaken the African National Congress, you must attack and attack its head. So it's not about President Zuma. Those who think that it's only about President Zuma, they are being myopic. They are being naive in their understanding, because anybody else who occupy that position will face the same wrath as President Zuma. So whether you're making calls, which some of those calls are baseless, are groundless in terms of why President must resign, for us as the African National Congress, we're undeterred. We think that President Zuma, this coming Sunday, will still lead us to provide and present and declare this year in terms of the National Executive Committee, as it would have been mandated by the leadership of the ANC through the National Executive Committee statement.
Can we expect the ANC to discuss the issue of the consultative conference once again? Some ANC veterans grouping having rejected the NEC's decision to grant 2 days for the general consultation?
That issue has been discussed. You recall that one of the NECs, we even came to the determination that perhaps, given the interaction that we have had with our veterans, the proposal of veterans kind of consultative conference, perhaps we could provide 2 days, but it must be linked to a policy conference so that politically its outcome and the product must also be part of the work of the policy conference. Whether there are new proposals, and that will continue to engage with our veterans, because we must discuss practicalities of any proposal. It's going to be a very eventful year for the African National Congress. Absolutely. This weekend already, like the leadership of the ANC has already landed in numbers in Gauteng. Soon we're going to the Lekgotla of the leadership of the NEC. Soon we're going to the State of the Nation address. Soon is budget. Immediately after that, our structures on the ground, our branches, we are launching discussion documents to prepare for the policy conference. Soon after that, in the roadmap already we have adopted for the national policy, for the national 54th national conference of the ANC. At what point do we put in the interim other forums, which in themselves they require the participation of the entire mobilization of the organization? So there are certain things that we must discuss with practicality in mind. That is it doable? Is it practically to do certain things? But we'll continue to talk to our veterans.
But I want to bring you to your attention to what the president said. President Zuma had cautioned religious leaders to avoid being drawn into divisive party political squabbles.
Religious leaders continue
what is their purpose, when it comes to peace and in the country, even outside of politics? Where do we draw the line?
No, because if you see an organization that is embroiled, is hijacked by factions and so on, it may be important that the role of religious leaders themselves must be such that they are able to rise above those factions, must rise above and talk about unity, talk about peace in the country, talk about nation building. I don't think at any stage the president would have suggested that religious leaders must not play any role in the nation building, because throughout history they have played an important role. And I think we'll continue to call on them. Whether we're talking about issues of social justice, whether we're talking about nation building, we still call on them that they must continue, including to pray for the leadership of the country as expected in terms of the Bible. And I think the different interpretations would have been that the president was calling on religious leaders not to participate in the political space. Many of them had sacrificed everything else and become members of the African National Congress. In fact, many leaders of the ANC were pastors, including the current president.
Right. Let's talk about the discussion around succession. It can't be avoided. Despite the several requests made by the ANC, alliance partners seem to have already made their choices. How do you think this will affect the dynamics of this discussion?
That discussion in the ANC is neither here nor there. That discussion has not even started. However, there are voices outside of the ANC, unmandated, that continue to raise the debate. We'll continue to restate a principle and the position of the ANC. That a certain discussion in the ANC that we know may be divisive, we don't allow them. There's going to be time in the ANC. We know the uncontrollable desire for power sometimes. People, they even undermine genuine guidelines of the African National Congress. Only structures of the ANC, branches, mandated by branches, would speak in an appropriate time who must be the leader or leadership of the ANC. Nobody else. I mean, we have already spoken about alliance structures. It's only branches of the ANC as defined in terms of the guidelines and the constitution of the ANC that will determine who will be the leader of the ANC.
And speaking of leadership positions, there have been calls for the induction of Hlaudi Motsoeneng into the ANC as National Executive Committee. Would you like to comment on that?
Nobody can be pronounced ahead of the processes of the ANC. That's why we have always called on order on our structures. That it is premature to call about who must be in leadership even now, even on names. We are not even discussing names since as last year. We started a process of discussing principles, because you can't just throw a name not being informed what principles guide a name. Because anybody can just declare himself and avail himself. It is this uncontrollable desire for power that sometimes it creates slates in the organization. We must discuss principles that, among others, must unite the African National Congress. When we agree on principles of uniting the African National Congress, it's very easy to come with names. In fact, some of those names will not even fit those principles at the end of the day if we agree as membership of the ANC what kind of the ANC we want to see post this conference.
Let's go back to President Zuma. Recently, again, spoke about how a group of people have managed to set a narrative of negativity against him, and how all comrades seem to have fallen into the trap and start to repeat the same narrative of corruption over and over again. And eventually you would think that, you know, this is true because it's something that keeps on being repeated even in the media outlets. What could be a possible reason that the president would say that? What will the ANC do to deal with such narratives? It's
precisely the point I made earlier. In order to damage the integrity of the African National Congress, you won't talk about any member in the African National Congress, whether in the cabinet or whether in the National Executive Committee. If you're talking about credibility of the ANC to provide leadership in society, you must focus on its leader. And those who have always been, we have defined the African National Congress as an enemy, they understand that theory well. They have tried over a period of time to portray President Zuma as this person was corrupt, and nothing has now that have been proven by a court of law that President Zuma has been found guilty of corruption. But the narrative is part of the narrative, among others, which people made as a campaign tool, both in 2019, in 2015, and 2014 elections, including the recent local government election. It won't stop. It won't stop, because even in the next person who will be the president of the ANC, a narrative will be found to make sure that the ANC is not able to provide leadership in society, and therefore its leadership is questionable.
Right. President Zuma said that Monopoly Capital and their friends and their stooges attacked himself, and they still, attack him today. And we're not there to defend the collective decision. The question is, if the president takes another decision, are we ready? Are we alert? As the ANC, this is the question that will be coming from yourselves. Are you ready to take this on, to protect him, so to speak?
We have always, remember, the one thing about President Zuma, he does not take decisions on his own. Almost all decisions, whether you're talking about decisions that he's got a prerogative to take in terms of the Constitution of the Republic, he does consult the leadership of the ANC, whether through officials or one form or another. But there is no way where the president takes a decision independently of the leadership of the ANC, because he understands that politically, whatever decision he takes, the leadership of the ANC must rally behind that decision.
Right. 2017 is going to be a defining year for the ANC. What are the top things that the party seeks? Okay, we've already discussed that. But just going back to the narratives that are already out in the media, I know that you have said that these things will keep going on and on, but how do you think they'll affect the conversation of the succession debate?
No, they won't affect. Let me tell you, the more people criticize, especially because the ANC enjoys so much support in South Africa. People of South Africa have got faith in the African National Congress. And sometimes they can see that some of the criticism, some of the attack meant towards the African National Congress, they're baseless. And therefore, the ANC will continue to enjoy overwhelming support among South Africans. And therefore, whether you attack the ANC through President Zuma, the ANC in each given epoch, it has always faced challenges, but it always emerges strong like a rose that grew from the concrete. Even as people who are faced with these challenges this year, we are going to face these challenges, which we anticipate. The ANC will emerge stronger than it was in 2016.
Right, but do you agree with the rationale put forth behind Tshwane Meyer for his visit to Taiwan that seems to have raised a lot of fury coming from the ANC?
No, South Africa is respected and honored in terms of its role as a very important and a credible international player, both in the continent. And it's important because we've been very consistent in terms of the articulation of our foreign policy and execution, to an extent that the trade relations, the diplomatic relations we have with many other countries are always guided by principal positions which are derived both in terms of our foreign policy and the constitution. And therefore, those who hold official passports, such as mayors and so on, because in the context of our constitution, it does create a cooperative governance. For example, the sphere which must cooperate with one another between the national and local government and so on. It does not create. South Africa is a unitary state. So all other spheres must work together to advance our foreign policy, to advance national interests. So to go to a country that is de-recognized in terms of our relations and one China policy is actually in violation of South Africa's foreign policy. But the point we make is that perhaps COCTA must come in and induct our councillors, because a number of municipalities and different spheres do enter into bilateral agreements with a number of countries. But that must be done in strict conformity with our foreign policy. It can't be done to undermine and to put South Africa into disrepute internationally. In
his defense, the Tshwane Mayor says that he is in Taiwan to explore possible investment opportunities. Can the Tshwane Mayor then hope to achieve anything out of the visit that is, given the one China policy? That
I don't think he understands firstly the foreign policy of South Africa. It will be better for him as a government official who holds an official passport, that perhaps as a mayor of the capital, he must familiarize himself with foreign policy. He will understand better, because if that is his explanation, then he's likely to commit many mistakes and is likely to embarrass South Africa internationally.
There has been allegations that this is a borderline trying to run a parallel government with the DA going their own way, with this visit that is not being sanctioned by the government.
Precisely the point we make earlier is that in terms of corporate governance, the provision of corporate governance, that all spheres may enter and entities may enter into bilateral agreements with a number of countries, including institutions, but that must be done in strict conformity to advance our foreign policy and the national interest. So there is we're not a federal state, where because of a certain political party is running a municipality X, and therefore that municipality can act against a foreign policy. It doesn't work in that way in South Africa. So if there is such a proposal by any party, whether it's a Democratic Alliance, obviously the reason we ask for COCTA to induct councillors, because sometimes they will play ignorant, that we do not know that this is what the foreign policy was saying. We think that is important that we continue to raise an issue, because to argue that he was correct, he was in fact wrong. He has embarrassed South Africa by his visit to Taipei, using an official South African passport, by the way.